Today, you'll hear a story about a powerful CEO who discovers a mysterious connection between a young girl and his late wife, turning his world upside down. Before this thrilling story begins, tell US where you're listening from and leave a like if you enjoy it, or comment. The autumn wind whipped through the streets of Manhattan, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of winter. 53-year-old Alexander Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on the 58th floor, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over New York. As CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, one of the largest investment firms on Wall Street, Alexander had built an empire from nothing, climbing his way from a small-town boy in Ohio to one of the most powerful men in the financial world. But success had come at a price. 2 years ago, his wife Catherine had died in a car accident on a rainy night much like this one. Since then, Alexander had buried himself in his work, becoming more demanding, more ruthless, and more isolated. His employees feared him. His executive team walked on eggshells around him. Even his 25-year-old son James had distanced himself, tired of his father's emotional unavailability. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your 6 p.m. call with Tokyo is ready. Alexander turned from the window. Put them through, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He settled into his leather chair, the one Catherine had picked out for him when they'd redesigned the office 5 years ago. It still smelled faintly of her perfume sometimes. Or perhaps that was just his imagination. The call dragged on for over an hour, negotiations about a potential acquisition in the Asian market. By the time he hung up, the office building had emptied out. The cleaning crew would be starting their rounds. Alexander loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on his credenza, a habit he'd developed after Catherine's death. As he sipped the amber liquid, he heard the soft squeak of the cleaning cart outside his office. Usually, he ignored the cleaning staff, but tonight, something made him look up as a middle-aged Latina woman entered, pushing her cart. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she said with a slight accent, clearly startled to find him still there. "I can come back later." "It's fine, Maria," Alexander said, surprising himself that he remembered her name. She had been cleaning the executive floor for years, but he rarely acknowledged the support staff. "I'll be leaving soon." Maria nodded and began emptying the trash bins. Alexander returned to reviewing reports on his tablet, but something felt off. He glanced up again and noticed Maria seemed nervous, constantly looking toward the door. Then he saw it, a small shadow behind her cart. "Is someone there with you?" he asked sharply. Maria froze. "I'm sorry, sir. It's my granddaughter. The babysitter canceled, and I couldn't." "It's against company policy to bring family members into the building," Alexander interrupted coldly. "You know that?" "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she continued working. Alexander was about to dismiss the matter when a small figure emerged from behind the cart. A girl, no more than 8 years old, with large brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in 2 neat braids. She wore a simple blue dress and sneakers, but it was what was around her neck that made Alexander's blood run cold. A silk scarf, midnight blue with tiny embroidered stars. Catherine's scarf, the one she'd been wearing the day she died, the one that had somehow disappeared from the personal effects the hospital had returned to him. "Where did you get that?" Alexander demanded, rising from his chair so abruptly that the girl shrank back behind her grandmother. "Sir," Maria looked confused and frightened. "That scarf." Alexander pointed at the girl, his hand shaking. "Where did she get it?" The girl clutched the scarf protectively. "It's mine," she said in a small but determined voice. "Elena, hush," Maria whispered, then turned to Alexander. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't understand. That scarf belonged to my wife," Alexander said, his voice hoarse. "It was with her when the accident happened. How does your granddaughter have it?" Maria's eyes widened. "Sir, that's impossible. Elena found this scarf in Central Park almost 2 years ago. There was no one around to claim it, so she kept it. It's her favorite. 2 years ago, right after Catherine died." Alexander felt dizzy, memories flooding back, Catherine's laugh, the way she'd wrapped that scarf around her neck on chilly mornings, how she'd said the tiny embroidered stars reminded her of the night sky over the small town where they'd met as teenagers. Elena, Alexander said, forcing his voice to soften as he addressed the frightened child. May I see the scarf for a moment? The girl looked up at her grandmother, who nodded hesitantly. Elena unwound the scarf from her neck and timidly approached Alexander's desk, placing it carefully on the edge before retreating to Maria's side. With trembling fingers, Alexander picked up the scarf. There, in the corner, were the embroidered initials he knew would be there. K.B. Catherine Blackwood. And beside them, nearly invisible unless you knew to look, a tiny bird. The blackbird Catherine had added as a playful reference to their last name. This was my wife's, he whispered, more to himself than to them. How is this possible? Sir, I swear Elena found it. We would never take something that didn't belong to us, Maria said, putting her arm protectively around her granddaughter. Alexander looked at them, the worried grandmother and the curious child who somehow, through some twist of fate, had ended up with Catherine's cherished scarf. It was as if Catherine herself had orchestrated this moment, this impossible connection. I believe you, he said finally. He looked at Elena, who was watching him with those large, solemn eyes. How old are you, Elena? 8, she answered quietly. And you like this scarf? She nodded. It makes me feel safe, like someone's watching over me. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. That was exactly what Catherine had said about the scarf when he'd given it to her on their 15th anniversary. That wearing it made her feel protected, connected to him even when they were apart. Are you enjoying our story? Tell us where you're watching our videos from. Leave your city in the comments, and let us know what else you'd like to hear about. Suggest a story for us. Mr. Blackwood, we should go, Maria said anxiously. I'm very sorry about bringing Elena and about the scarf. If you want it back. No, Alexander said suddenly, surprising himself. He carefully folded the scarf and held it out to Elena. It's yours now. I think my wife would want you to have it. Elena's eyes widened. Really? Alexander nodded, a strange sense of peace washing over him. Really? But perhaps, if it's okay with your grandmother, you could tell me sometime how you found it? The whole story. Maria looked shocked, then relieved. Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Alexander, he corrected her. Please call me Alexander. That night marked the beginning of a transformation for Alexander Blackwood. The encounter with Elena and the scarf had cracked open something that had been sealed shut since Catherine's death. He invited Maria and Elena to his office the following week, ordering in pizza and listening as Elena recounted finding the scarf caught on a bench in Central Park during a school field trip. It was like it was waiting for me, she explained, her small hands gesturing animatedly. The wind kept making it flutter, but it didn't blow away. Alexander learned that Maria was raising Elena alone after her daughter, Elena's mother, had died of cancer 3 years earlier. The parallels weren't lost on him. A child missing her mother, just as he missed his wife. A woman carrying the weight of loss and responsibility, just as he had been. Over the following months, Alexander made changes. He established a scholarship fund in Catherine's name for children who had lost parents. He implemented family-friendly policies at Blackwood Enterprises, including an on-site childcare center that Elena attended after school while Maria worked. He reconnected with his son James, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease as they shared memories of Catherine and began building new ones together. The employees who had once feared him now approached him with ideas and concerns. The executive team that had walked on eggshells found a leader who listened and collaborated. The business flourished not despite these changes, but because of them. One evening, nearly a year after first meeting Elena, Alexander sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Maria knocked on his open door. Elena wanted to show you something before we left, she said with a smile that had become familiar and welcome. Elena bounded in, clutching a school project. Alexander, look what I made. Alexander set aside his work, giving the child his full attention, something he'd learned from her. What have you got there? She proudly displayed a science project about stars and constellations. Remember how you told me the stars on the scarf are the same as the ones you could see from your hometown? I researched it. That's impressive work, Alexander said, genuinely impressed by her attention to detail and her connection to something that had been so special to Catherine. My teacher says I might win the science fair, Elena said hopefully. Would you come? It's next Thursday. I wouldn't miss it, Alexander promised, and he meant it. He had rearranged board meetings for Elena's school events before. His executive team no longer questioned these priorities. Many of them had begun doing the same for their own families. After Elena and Maria left, Alexander stood at his office windows, watching the city lights just as he had that fateful evening a year ago. But now, instead of isolation, he felt connection. Instead of grief consuming him, he had found a way to honor Catherine's memory by living as she would have wanted him to live. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Still on for dinner tomorrow? Bringing someone I'd like you to meet. Alexander smiled and typed back, looking forward to it. As he prepared to leave the office, he noticed a framed photograph on his desk that hadn't been there that morning. It was a picture of Catherine wearing the blue scarf, laughing at something off camera. Beside it was a note in his assistant's handwriting. Found this while digitizing old company photos. Thought you might want it. Alexander touched the frame gently. Thank you, he whispered to his assistant, to Elena, to Maria, to James, to all the people who had helped him find his way back to living. But mostly to Catherine, whose presence he still felt guiding him, whose love had somehow led that scarf to a little girl who needed it, and through her had helped heal his broken heart. The following Thursday, Alexander sat in a folding chair in the elementary school gymnasium, watching proudly as Elena explained her constellation project to the science fair judges. Maria sat beside him, nervous for her granddaughter. She worked so hard on this, Maria whispered. She's doing great, Alexander assured her. Catherine would have loved this. She was always fascinated by the stars. Maria squeezed his hand briefly. You've changed so much since that night in your office. Alexander nodded. Elena reminded me of what matters. You both did. When Elena won second place, her face lit up with joy. She ran to them, metal bouncing against her chest, the blue scarf, now a permanent part of her wardrobe, trailing behind her. I did it, she exclaimed. You certainly did, Alexander said, kneeling to her level. I'm very proud of you. As they walked out of the school together, Elena between them holding both their hands, Alexander felt a sense of rightness, of family. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new and valuable that honored Catherine's memory rather than burying it. That weekend, Alexander invited Maria and Elena to his home for the first time, a penthouse apartment that had felt too empty, too full of ghosts for too long. James came too, bringing his new girlfriend, a pediatric nurse named Sophia, who immediately hit it off with Elena. As they all sat around his dining table, laughing and sharing stories, Alexander caught sight of Elena's scarf draped over the back of her chair. The tiny embroidered stars seemed to twinkle in the light. A reminder of Catherine, yes, but no longer just a symbol of loss. Now, it represented connection, coincidence, perhaps even something like fate, though Alexander, ever the pragmatic businessman, hesitated to call it that. What he knew for certain was that a scarf had brought together lives that might never have intersected otherwise. A cleaning lady and a CEO, a lonely widower and a child missing her mother, a son estranged from his father, all of them forming a new kind of family, unexpected but no less real for it. Later that evening, after Maria and Elena had gone home and James had left with Sophia, Alexander stood on his terrace overlooking the city. The night was clear, the stars visible despite the city lights. He thought about coincidences and connections, about loss and healing, about the strange ways life continues after devastating loss. He thought about a blue scarf with tiny embroidered stars, fluttering in the wind in Central Park, waiting to be found by a little girl who would one day help heal his broken heart. And for the first time in years, Alexander Blackwood felt truly at peace. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the newly renovated child care center at Blackwood Enterprises, cutting a ribbon while employees and their families applauded. The sign above the door read, "The Catherine Blackwood Children's Center," and beneath it was a beautiful mural of a night sky filled with stars. Elena stood beside him, proudly wearing her blue scarf despite the warm spring day. Maria watched from the crowd, alongside James and Sophia, who was now wearing an engagement ring, as Alexander gave a short speech about the importance of family and work-life balance. He caught the eye of his executive team. These were the same people who had once feared his temper and unpredictability in the dark days after Catherine's death. Now, they looked at him with respect and genuine admiration. This center represents Blackwood Enterprises' commitment to supporting our most valuable asset, our people and their families, Alexander concluded. And it honors the memory of someone who always believed that success meant nothing without connection to those we love. After the ceremony, as employees toured the facility with their children, Alexander found himself standing before the wall of commemorative photographs. There was one of Catherine at a company picnic years ago, laughing as she helped organize a children's game. Beside it now hung a new photo: Alexander, Maria, Elena, James, and Sophia at the company Christmas party, all smiling, a family created not by blood but by choice and circumstance. And draped carefully around Elena's neck in the photo was the blue scarf with tiny embroidered stars, a thread connecting past to present, lost to healing, strangers to family. The spring sun filtered through the windows of Alexander's new office, now located in a smaller, more welcoming building. The company had moved its headquarters to a place that better reflected its new values. Less imposing, more human. On the wall, beside the family photos, hung a certificate: Elena Blackwood Foundation, recognition for excellence in orphan children assistance. Elena, now 9 years old, burst through the office door with the energy that had become so familiar to everyone at Blackwood Industries. Her school uniform was slightly wrinkled, her backpack hanging from one shoulder, but her eyes sparkled with the same intensity that had first captured Alexander's attention 2 years ago. "Papa Alex," she called out, using the name she had chosen for him after months of careful consideration. "Look what I made in art class." She held up a painting, a watercolor scene of a family standing in front of a large building. The figures were unmistakably Alexander, Maria, Elena, James, and Sophia, but what made Alexander's breath catch was the delicate blue scarf painted around one of the figures, and in the sky above them, tiny silver stars that seemed to shimmer even in the painted form. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Alexander said, kneeling down to her level. "Tell me about it." "Well," Elena began, her voice taking on the serious tone she used when explaining something important, "this is our family in front of the new building. And see these stars? Maria told me that Aunt Isabella is watching over us from up there, making sure we're all happy and safe." Alexander felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but it was different now. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the bittersweet ache of love that encompasses both grief and joy. "I think you're absolutely right." Maria appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood." She ran ahead when she saw the building. "No need to apologize," Alexander smiled. "She's home here." And it was true. Over the past 2 years, Blackwood Industries had transformed into something Isabella would have been proud of. The Elena Blackwood Foundation, established in honor of both the little girl who had changed their lives and the woman who had inspired it all, had helped over 300 children find homes. The company's profits were no longer the sole measure of success. Now, they measured impact, lives changed, families created. James knocked on the doorframe. "Alexander, the adoption papers are ready for your final signature." Elena's eyes widened. They had been working toward this moment for months, navigating the complex legal system, but Elena had been patient, understanding that some things worth having required time. "Are you sure about this, little star?" Alexander asked, using Isabella's pet name that had somehow naturally transferred to Elena. Elena nodded solemnly, then broke into the brightest smile. "I've been sure since the day you gave me Isabella's scarf. I knew then that some families aren't born, they're chosen." As Alexander signed the papers that would legally make Elena his daughter, he felt Isabella's presence more strongly than he had in years. Not the haunting presence of grief, but the warm, approving presence of love that transcends death. Sophia burst through the door moments later, having heard the news from James. "It's official," she announced, sweeping Elena into a hug. "Welcome to the family, officially. I have something for you," Elena said quietly to Alexander after the celebration had calmed down. She reached in her backpack and pulled out a small, wrapped package. Inside was a hand-carved wooden frame, clearly made in a children's workshop, containing a photo Elena had taken of Alexander standing by Isabella's grave, the blue scarf in his hands. But what made it extraordinary was the message Elena had written in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. To Papa Alex, thank you for showing me that love doesn't end. It just finds new ways to grow. Love, your daughter Elena. P.S. I think Aunt Isabella would be happy. Alexander felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at this child who had somehow understood, with the clarity that only children possess, exactly what he needed to hear. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner in Alexander's apartment, now truly a family home with Elena's artwork on the refrigerator and her books scattered on the coffee table, Elena made an announcement. "I want to keep wearing Isabella's scarf," she said seriously. "Not because I'm trying to replace her, but because I want to carry her love forward. Maria told me that's what love does. It doesn't stay in one place, it travels from person to person, making everyone it touches a little bit better." Alexander looked around the table at this unlikely family. Maria, who had become like a grandmother to Elena, James and Sophia, who had embraced their roles as aunt and uncle with enthusiasm, and Elena, the little girl who had walked into his life carrying a piece of his past and had somehow made his future possible again. As James presented the adoption papers, Alexander felt a profound sense of destiny. This wasn't just a legal formality. It was the culmination of a journey he never anticipated, a testament to the unexpected paths healing could take. He picked up the pen, his hand steady despite the tremor of emotion in his chest. Elena, perched on the edge of her seat, watched him with wide, expectant eyes. Her earlier words echoed in his mind. "I've been sure since the day you gave me Isabella's scarf. I knew then that some families aren't born, they're chosen." With a deep breath, Alexander scrawled his signature, making it official. The ink dried, sealing not just a legal bond, but a deeply felt emotional one. A collective cheer erupted from James and Sophia. Sophia, true to her effervescent nature, swept Elena into a joyful hug, twirling her around. "It's official," she announced, her voice ringing with genuine happiness. "Welcome to the family, officially." Maria, tears glistening in her eyes, embraced Alexander, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey and the beautiful outcome. The apartment, once a silent monument to his grief, now vibrated with laughter and genuine affection. Later, as the initial excitement subsided, Elena approached Alexander, a small, wrapped package in her hands. "I have something for you," she said quietly, her usual boisterous energy replaced by a tender solemnity. Inside was a hand-carved wooden frame, clearly a product of a children's workshop, containing a photo Elena had taken of Alexander standing by Isabella's grave, the blue scarf clutched in his hands. But what made it extraordinary was the message Elena had written in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. To Papa Alex, thank you for showing me that love doesn't end. It just finds new ways to grow. Love, your daughter Elena. P.S. I think Aunt Isabella would be happy. Alexander felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at this child who had somehow understood, with the clarity that only children possess, exactly what he needed to hear. Her words were a balm to old wounds, a confirmation that his heart, once shattered, was not only mending but expanding. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner in Alexander's apartment, now truly a family home with Elena's artwork on the refrigerator and her books scattered on the coffee table, Elena made an announcement. "I want to keep wearing Isabella's scarf," she said seriously. "Not because I'm trying to replace her, but because I want to carry her love forward. Maria told me that's what love does. It doesn't stay in one place, it travels from person to person, making everyone it touches a little bit better." Alexander looked around the table at this unlikely family. Maria, who had become like a grandmother to Elena, her quiet strength a constant presence. James and Sophia, who had embraced their roles as aunt and uncle with enthusiasm, their youthful energy a refreshing contrast to Alexander's previous solitude. And Elena, the little girl who had walked into his life carrying a piece of his past and had somehow made his future possible again. The scarf, draped over Elena's chair, seemed to glow, a silent witness to the profound transformation it had catalyzed. The following months solidified this new family dynamic. Alexander, now a father again, found a renewed purpose that transcended the boardroom. His days were no longer solely dictated by market fluctuations and corporate acquisitions. He attended Elena's school plays, helped with her science projects, and even learned to appreciate the chaotic joy of a child's birthday party. Blackwood Enterprises, under his revitalized leadership, continued its evolution. The Catherine Blackwood Children's Center thrived, a beacon of the company's commitment to its employees' well-being. The Elena Blackwood Foundation, fueled by Alexander's personal dedication and the company's resources, expanded its reach, providing support and homes for hundreds of orphan children. Maria, now an integral part of the Blackwood household, continued her work with a quiet dignity, but her relationship with Alexander had deepened into one of mutual respect and affection. She often shared stories of Elena's childhood, filling in gaps that Alexander, as a new father, was eager to learn. James and Sophia, now engaged, frequently joined them for family dinners, their laughter echoing through the once somber penthouse. Sophia, with her background as a pediatric nurse, became a valuable advisor for the foundation, bringing a practical, compassionate perspective to its operations. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 3 years after the fateful encounter in his office, Alexander found himself in Central Park with Elena. She was chasing fallen leaves, her blue scarf a vibrant splash of color against the muted tones of the park. He watched her, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. The park, once a place of painful memories linked to Catherine's death and the scarf's mysterious reappearance, was now a symbol of new beginnings. Elena, breathless, returned to his side, clutching a handful of colorful leaves. "Papa Alex," she said, looking up at him, her eyes bright. "Do you think Aunt Isabella would like the park today?" Alexander smiled, reaching out to adjust the scarf around her neck. "I think she would love it, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I think she'd be incredibly proud of you. And of us." He knew, with absolute certainty, that Catherine's spirit lived on, not just in the memories he cherished, but in the vibrant, loving family that had blossomed from the seeds of his grief. The scarf, once a painful reminder of loss, was now a living symbol of enduring love, connection, and the extraordinary power of a chosen family. It was a story still being written, one chapter at a time, filled with hope, resilience, and the quiet magic of human connection.